What's going on, guys? This is Rob. This is the now iconic story that most people are aware of where Thor becomes unworthy. So we're wrapping up Original Sin. This is the conclusion. And what ends up happening here is Nick Fury tells his story. Now, a little bit of catch up. Of course, the video's there for you guys to check out if you want to. The long and short of it is the Watcher was killed and his eyes were stolen. And various superheroes were sent on this kind of mission to figure out what it was that had happened and how the Watcher had been killed, only for them all to coalesce on this space station that doesn't exist according to any records, and for Nick Fury to appear as basically this grizzled old man. And so with Nick Fury spilling the beans on seemingly how all this started, he talks about going back to 1958, specifically within Kansas, and that in this point in his life, he's basically a CIA spy, right? So his days of leading the Howling Commandos, rescuing Abraham Erskine from Germany, bringing him over to the States so that Steve Rogers can become Captain America, those days are basically over. And what ends up happening is that when he gets over to Kansas, there's an alien invasion taking place. And in fact, they'd wiped out the town before Nick Fury and his forces even got there. By the time the army arrived there, they were wiped out in 10 minutes. These guys never stood a chance. And so where Nick Fury is seemingly facing down his own death, he's suddenly met by the arrival of Woody McCord. Now, Woody McCord is an introduction in this story. His story begins and ends here, although there is a comic tie-in called Operation Sin, which actually kind of goes into how it was he got wrapped up in all this in the first place. We'll kind of run over that here in a second. The long and short of this is he talks about delivering a package, and then he says, "Do it, Howard," right? Referring to Howard Stark. The package is basically detonated because it was a bomb. The portal's destroyed, but not before Woody is mortally injured. And so he kind of starts asking questions to Nick Fury, right? Was it worth it, right? Was it worth it for me to do all of this? And Nick Fury doesn't really know exactly what he's talking about. He doesn't fully understand what's going on here. The remnants of the aliens coming out of the portal are all basically burning to a crisp, so the alien invasion has officially been stopped. And Howard Stark arrives on the scene. Now, Nick Fury knows who Howard is, so of course, Howard doesn't really need an introduction here. The question of Nick is, who is this dead guy who just saved the world? And that's where Howard starts spilling beans on his own. And what he says is that Woodrow McCord is what was called the man on the wall, that he has all these technological resources at his disposal, alien tech, all kinds of arms and armament, and he does not answer to any government. That what ended up happening by way of Operation Sin, essentially, there was basically an alien invasion. Peggy Carter, Howard Stark, and Woodrow McCord teamed up in order to stop it and then thwart the efforts of Hydra, so on and so forth. But that's where the agreement was struck, that there are various threats out there, and the superheroes are not going to be able to tend to them all of the time due to any number of factors that are out there, given how few superheroes there were at this particular point in the history of the world. And so Woodrow McCord became the man on the wall, basically going through and taking out any threat that exists to the world. And that's why Howard tells him there has to be a man on the wall. There has to be someone guarding and protecting Earth from various threats that exist out there. And so Nick Fury takes the guy's place. And what you end up doing is switching over to yet another alien invasion. And the leader of this invasion gets shot before the whole thing even starts. And there's Nick Fury standing on an asteroid with probably the biggest gun that I've ever seen. And so it goes over and over and over again. He's going down into the subterranean realm of the Maloids. There's a monster down there that basically wants to invade the Earth, take things over. But as all this happens, he kind of explains it all. He says, instead of being sent to destabilize a Southeast Asian country that some desk jockey worried might someday be a threat to our way of life, I was taking down aliens who wanted to eat us. For every subterranean monster who tried to invade Manhattan, there were 10 more that you've never heard of because they never made it out of their cave. Monday through Thursday, I'd be spying on hippies and commies for the CIA, but come Friday, it was the netherworld to see which of the old gods was looking to use the Earth for its nesting ground. And so what he ends up doing is basically switching over to a meeting at S.H.I.E.L.D. Again, this whole thing being a backstory where he's actually filled in by a couple of individuals about the gamma bomb incident that took place in New Mexico and the possible involvement of Tony Stark. Because one of the things that was revealed in Original Sin is that Tony Stark was involved in the gamma incident that led to Bruce Banner becoming the Incredible Hulk. He wasn't necessarily the cause of it, but he was involved in it. It's a really, really cool tie-in. We did originally cover it, but if you you guys want me to remaster it, I'll remaster that one too. It's pretty dope, right? Like, the Incredible Hulk humbles Tony Stark quite readily. But one of the other things they talk about are the accounts of the Man-Spider, who's mostly been seen in the Forest Hills neighborhood of New York. So as you guys can tell, it's the early days of superheroes in Marvel, the rise of the Incredible Hulk, the rise of Spider-Man. There's a scroll, for example, that Nick Fury basically tracks down and essentially tortures in order to gain information on whatever potential invasion the Skrulls wanted to launch against humanity. But there comes a point when he's in New York, he almost kills Spider-Man, right? One of the things that Nick Fury's told by one of his agents is he says, "We use Banner's own gamma bomb design, sir, for these bullets. They should be able to put a hole in even someone as strong as Thor." And so that's where he just kind of watches Spider-Man and he's like, you know what? Let's see what this kid ends up becoming. Let's see what happens. Right now, he's not doing anything nefarious. So Spider-Man was a hair's breadth away from being killed by Nick Fury. And yet it's another instance where Nick Fury goes out into space, he destroys a world that presumably intends to show up to Earth and destroy it itself, right? Something akin to Ego the Living Planet. And where Nick Fury kind of muses over the idea that nothing's being seen, right? He says, "I've killed more times than I can count. I've burned worlds, destabilized galaxies, dethroned gods. And I did it without any of them even knowing my name." That's what it means to be the man on the wall, to be the invisible monster who keeps the other monsters at bay, forever unnamed, unknown, and unseen. The reality is the Watcher saw it all. And so he says that, I suppose, in a nutshell, is why you're all here. Now remember, this is just a small contingent of the superheroes who have been gathered. Thor and those guys have not been called in yet. They will, but not yet. Because what ends up happening is that where everybody's kind of talking to Nick Fury, trying to understand why it is that he's revealing all this information in the first place, why he's old instead of youthful, the way that he traditionally is, that what Nick Fury reveals is that the Infinity Formula has worn off. Now, some people are aware of the Infinity Formula, others are not. For those of you guys who don't know, the Infinity Formula is quite literally a formula consumed by Nick Fury, as well as Dum Dum Dugan and a few other members of the Howling Commandos, that keep them youthful. This is one of those instances where Marvel was looking to shuffle Nick Fury off to the cornfields and basically replace him with Samuel Jackson's Nick Fury, right? Marvel Cinematic Universe synergy, right? Whatever the case is. And so the Infinity Formula has essentially run its course. He doesn't have it anymore, and that's the reason why he aged up so fast. More so than that, what we end up finding out here, and really are kind of left to deduce, is that all the different versions of Nick Fury that we've seen in Marvel Comics up to this point was not the real Nick Fury. They were all life model decoys. Right? The real Nick Fury was just sitting on this satellite or operating as the man on the wall, taking out the various threats that existed out there, which, given the context of Marvel, was kind of nuts. And so one of the things that we learn is that because the Infinity Formula is running out, Nick Fury is getting older, he's dying. He's aging at a rapid rate. And so his days are numbered, and they're numbered very, very short. And so again, where the question's asked, what's the whole deal? Is this like some kind of deathbed confession? What's your whole motivation here? Nick Fury reveals that his intention is to have one of them replace him as the man on the wall. Hence the reason why they were chosen. Frank Castle would be the most logical candidate because Frank Castle would be inclined to kill you if for no other reason than inconveniencing him. You know what I mean? Right? Everybody else here is a little sketchy. Moon Knight might be the next best choice. Doctor Strange deals with threats like this all the time, but he's more magic and mysticism, and given the number of threats he has to contend with, probably doesn't have time for it. No way Black Panther would ever go along with something like this. So again, right, that's the kind of question they have here. Now, the other part of this is the regular Avengers roster itself. Iron Man, Captain America, Black Widow, Wolverine. They don't know what's going on. They don't know about the older Nick Fury, everything being a life model decoy. But now they're finding out. They're realizing that this Nick Fury, who had been killed by Bucky Barnes, because Bucky realized it was a life model decoy, they're just now figuring out that it was a life model decoy. Now, of course, again, Bucky killed that version of Nick because that's how he gained access to Nick Fury's satellite. It was really the only way to do it. But at this moment, because of the fact that the life model decoy explodes, Captain America's response, we're going into space, because Tony Stark ended up tracking a signal that was fired off just before it self-destructed, and that signal was traceable. So now they're heading out to that satellite. And so jumping back to the old man Nick Fury, you've essentially got a moral stalemate, right? From Nick Fury's perspective, he's been saving the world, protecting it from all different number of threats. But the superhero's response is, you have to stand for your crimes. You have literally mass murdered, and there's no way we can simply just let that go. But it's really interesting how Nick Fury responds to that, because one of the things he says is that when Doctor Strange chimes in and says, this is insanity, right? Your physical condition must be affecting your mind. There was no need for this, for any of this. We save the world every day, all of us, without killing anyone. And then he says most of us, right? Because of course, the Punisher. And he says, if the world is in danger, we'll protect it the way that we always have, the right way. But the response of Nick is fascinating, because he says, someone who has literally walked through the netherworlds shouldn't be this naive, Stephen. The fact that I was always out there doing a job you never even had to know existed gave you the freedom to be naive, to keep your pretty little hands clean. You're about to lose that freedom, whether you like it or not. And it's an accurate statement. Right? If what Nick Fury is saying is the truth, the number of threats that the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, that the X-Men have faced off against that have been a threat to Earth, pale in comparison to the number of threats there actually were. And had it not been for Nick Fury, the world likely would have been conquered and destroyed eons ago, especially if you're talking about any number of these invasions taking place before there was an actual organized superhero community on Earth. And so with Nick Fury recognizing this is a stalemate, they're never going to come to his side, and he's certainly not going to bend himself and hand himself over to authorities to be arrested, it ultimately leads to him walking away and instructing the life model decoys to take out all the superheroes who were here. Now, the LMDs are every bit as capable of fighters as Nick Fury, but they're by no means these end-all, be-all beings that can destroy everything in existence, right? They're very advanced robots, nothing more, nothing less. But Nick Fury's frustration comes into play when he basically goes to meet with the Orb, who's currently being held prisoner. Now again, the Orb has a literal eye for a head, but the only real thing that goes on with the Orb here is the fact that there's some kind of connection between him and the eyes of the Watcher, and the Orb has some measure of clairvoyance, albeit very, very poorly fleshed out, because it's just kind of contextual and based on the story. But the eyes seem to have a thing for the Orb. For whatever reason, they want to be with him, and he wants to be with them. Now, it could be because he has a giant eye for a head, but the fact is, right, there's a kind of connection there. And so that's when there's an alert to a hull breach, and Nick Fury realizes the remaining contingent of the Avengers have shown up here. Luke Cage, the Incredible Hulk, Black Widow, Thor, Iron Man, Carol Danvers, the whole 9 yards. And so initially, they confront the LMDs, only for Nick Fury himself to finally appear, brandishing both of the Watcher's eyes, and in possession of what may very well be the most amazing suit of armor that we have ever seen. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that Bucky Barnes already had an eye in his possession when he invaded the space station of Nick Fury. So as to where the second eye came from, it was actually in possession by Nick himself. That at this point, we kind of get a flashback to everything that was going on with the initial death of the Watcher. We finally get to find out how everything unfolded. And what had gone on here is that when Dr. Midas and his daughter Exterminatrix, both of whom are for the most part irrelevant to the remainder of this story, and the Orb showed up here, their goal was to rob the joint. That was really it. They just wanted to show up, rob the Watcher, and then leave, just because of the fact that the Orb had been getting these kind of dream visions of the inside of the Watcher's citadel. So he basically knew how to navigate through the place. But when they show up here, of course, the Watcher is there, as you would expect. And so Dr. Midas sends his mindless ones against the Watcher, and then in turn, the Orb looks at everything that happens, and he says, look at that, right? Look at the power of the Watcher. Can you imagine having power like that? And that, of course, is where Exterminatrix is like, we found the armory, right? Grab everything you can and leave. But the Orb is entranced, right? He says, I wonder what it's like to be him, to see what he sees. And so when he's addressing the Watcher, he's like, you're scared, aren't you? Right? You're scared, right? You're holding back because you saw your own death, didn't you? And he says, I can see it in myself, in your eyes. And he's like, Watcher, I can help you. I can make sure you never have to see anything again. And the Orb fires off this massive bullet that hits the Watcher squarely in the face. But that's not actually how the Watcher dies. Instead, what ends up going on here is that Nick Fury arrives on the scene, keeping in mind, again, the whole flashback moment. And Nick Fury had basically bugged the place. He had bugged it quite some time ago, just to understand what was going on in the Watcher's citadel. And there's kind of an interesting moment here, because the Watcher never really says anything. Instead, it's almost Nick Fury arguing with himself and his own guilt over everything that he's done. And he says things that, where the Watcher's eye was essentially taken, of course, by the ore, but the Watcher's still alive, he says, they may have taken your eye, but I know you still see everything. You know who they are and where they came from and probably where they're headed right now. Just tell me and I will take care of the rest. But the Watcher never says anything. And he just says, there isn't time for this, right? Like, look at this damn place. It's been looted, and we both know what sort of trinkets you like to keep here. If just one of those things has fallen into the wrong hands, the entire Earth is in incredible danger. And that's where the Watcher simply says, you are correct, Nick Fury. I do see all things, even the unseen. And using his powers, he shows Nick Fury the fact that he's seen every instance where Nick went out and killed all these various enemies of Earth that existed out there. And so that's where Nick Fury starts to go off, right? He literally starts to lose it on the Watcher. And he says, you watch as I fought to save the world, and I won't make apologies for how I did it, especially not to you. You had the power to stop me if you wanted to. You had the power to stop it all, but all you ever did was nothing. I know, and I know you're bound to bear witness and not interfere as part of some crazy cosmic order of peeping Toms, and you like to brag about how you've broken that vow more times than anyone can count. And why? Because you showed up to shout out a warning, of course, obviously referencing the Fantastic Four and the coming of Galactus. And Nick says, I've been down there day after day in blood up to my knees. You wouldn't have an Earth to stand above and stare at if it hadn't been for me. And I'm not going to let you throw all of that away. Everything I did was worth it, so long as that Earth is still spinning. So tell me what you saw. Tell me who I have to kill next. And the Watcher simply just says, you already know. And so that's where things get wild, because what ends up happening is the Watcher starts to confront Nick Fury, right? Nick Fury says, why did they take your eye? And he says, I know this place. I've searched it myself when you've passed out in one of your fugue states. I had the whole place bugged for years. You've been watching me while I've been watching you. And that's when Nick starts putting things together on his own. He says, you never write anything down. All your secrets, everything you see, and you don't record any of it. Or do you? And that's when he realizes everything the Watcher's seen is in his eyes. And he says, do you know how many lives I could save with those secrets? Do you know how many lives could be lost or ruined if they end up in the wrong hands? Who was here? Who took your eye? And where Nick gets more and more frustrated, the Watcher simply says, I've seen too much. The Watcher's done, right? He's ready to be finished. And so he literally starts going forward to attack Nick Fury. And in an act of self-defense, Nick Fury fires off a shot and kills the Watcher. And then in turn, takes the Watcher's other eye with the intention of using it to find those individuals who had killed the Watcher. But more so than that, with the Watcher's eye and everything the Watcher has seen, he can deal with those threats before they ever become threats in the first place. And so what this does is it kind of switches back over to the fight that's taking place in the here and now. And Nick Fury is absolutely manhandling pretty much the entirety of the superhero community. And it makes sense, right? When you're talking about someone as capable and strategic as Nick Fury, this guy's backup plans have backup plans which have backup plans of their own. This man is always 3 or 4 steps ahead. As a frame of reference here, when it came to Secret Invasion, Nick Fury knew before everybody else did, and he was literally making plans and figuring out how to deal with the Secret Invasion before the superheroes even had an inkling of the fact that it was taking place in the first place. That's how far ahead this guy is. And so in this fight that he has, of course, the first one to step up is Spider-Man, really more to grab the eyes of the Watcher that had just kind of been tossed into orbit. And Captain America, being on the ropes and not being able to deal with Nick Fury on his own, calls in Thor. And here's the crazy thing, right? Where Thor tells him, right, like, the time has come to explain yourself. Your metal suit's failing and I do not want to harm you. The response of Nick, same to you, big guy, but I'm afraid this is gonna hurt. And I see that you've got a sister. And so where Thor's just kind of like, you have access to the Watcher's secrets. How? The response of Nick, learn from this hurt, Thor. Learn and be better for it. Never forget that it was not a punch that took you down, that despite all your strength, in the end, when you were beaten, all it took was a whisper. And Nick whispers into Thor's ear, and Thor immediately freaks out and loses the ability to wield his hammer. He becomes unworthy instantly. Now, here's the thing. I'm not going to do you guys like Marvel did to us at the time this story came out and made us wait like 3 years for an answer to this question. So the question is, what did Nick Fury say to Thor? What Nick Fury said is Gorr was right. And that ties in directly to the Jason Aaron Thor God of Thunder, when Gorr kept talking about how gods were horrible beings. Gods didn't care about anybody but themselves, that Thor didn't deserve to wield his own hammer. His worth was a lie he told himself. And so this crisis of confidence causes him to lose his hammer. At the same time, Iron Man can't even make any sense of it. Nick Fury sneaks up behind Iron Man and then just says, Stark override code, and then just a whole bunch of symbols, and the suit immediately returns to Earth when Nick Fury tells it to. So Nick Fury knows how to override all of Tony Stark's own armors. And so with Iron Man literally being sent back to Earth, Spider-Man floating out there in space, Thor's not able to lift his own hammer, and nobody else is out there in the fight. Captain America's watching it all unfold, sitting on a satellite because he's no contest for Nick Fury. Nick just travels back to the moon with the intention of trying to figure out how to unlock the secrets of the Watcher's eyes. Now, once Nick Fury actually gets inside of the Watcher's citadel proper, he finds Dr. Midas in there. And all that's really happening is Dr. Midas is just trying to absorb the powers of the Watcher so he can make himself stronger and then use it to try to conquer all things in existence. The guy's a sociopath, right? But again, that's about where his story ends, because his hand is blown off by Nick Fury. His daughter Exterminatrix grabs the hand and just takes off, and then her story kind of unfolds from there. She basically uses the touch of her father in order to create gold bullets, and then Marvel never really does anything with her character. But in turn, Nick Fury defeats Dr. Midas by taking the eye of the Watcher and shoving it into Dr. Midas himself, just because of the fact that it's a huge amount of power that's overwhelming him, right? So Dr. Midas basically explodes because it's more power than he can possibly handle. But the other cool thing that goes on here is that with the orb in possession of the other eye of the Watcher, the eye bonds itself to him. So now the orb starts walking around with an eye in his chest that allows him to basically see anything and everything that's going on throughout the entirety of the world. It doesn't really last too long, right? Marvel ultimately undoes this fairly quickly, but the final thing that's going on here is other Watchers have arrived to survey the entire situation, because killing a Watcher is no small thing. Number one, the level of power it would take to do that is pretty high or pretty extreme. You would need all kinds of arms and armament, right? Other Watchers will notice that. But more so than that, the level of arrogance and hubris it would take to kill a Watcher is the ultimate betrayal to the remainder of the other Watchers in that race. And so where Nick Fury is able to use the Watcher's eye to basically destroy Dr. Midas, and that really kind of eliminates the threat of Midas, right? He's no longer there absorbing the Watcher's energies from its corpse and then trying to figure out a way to take over the world. Nick Fury seemingly dies, right? Like the whole Watcher Citadel just explodes and then implodes on itself. And then Captain America basically addresses everybody else. Now, there's an important thing to know here about this conversation. If you're not looking at the full totality of Marvel, it's easy to miss. But what Captain America says here is he says, Fury's satellite full of LMDs, it disappeared the second he died. There's no sign of the orb or Exterminatrix. All those mindless ones that were so chatty before are suddenly mindless again. Whatever was here that they were all after, whatever the Watcher and Fury died for, it's gone now too, along with all the other Watchers. There's nobody left who can tell me why one of my oldest friends suddenly went crazy and died, unless there's something you gentlemen would like to add. And he directly addresses Doctor Strange and Black Panther. Now, the conversation that they kind of have here as Captain America walks away is Doctor Strange asks, Why don't you tell him? And Black Panther responds, I don't tell anyone anything. Why didn't you tell him? And that's where Strange says, I don't know. I still might, I suppose. But with the way things are after all of this, no one trusts anyone now. With so many of our secrets dragged into the light, somehow it's made us all more secretive than ever. And for now, I think we've all suffered enough for our sins. Maybe this one should die with fury. And that's where Black Panther simply says, then let us hope that it is actually dead. The secret they're referring to has nothing to do with Nick Fury or the Watcher or any of that stuff. Keep in mind, the significance of Original Sin with regards to Captain America is that when the orb blasted all the superheroes with the Watcher's eye in the first video that we did, and they all learned these various secrets that they didn't know existed out there, Captain America learned he was a member of the Illuminati when the incursions first kicked off, and where the other members of the Illuminati were willing to entertain the idea of destroying incursive worlds in order to save their own. Captain America was not, and because of that, Tony Stark ordered Doctor Strange to wipe his mind and throw him out of the Illuminati. And so up until that moment in Original Sin, Captain America didn't remember any of that, but now he does. And that's what he's talking about when he asks Black Panther and Doctor Strange, do you two have anything that you want to add? Because he knows what's actually going on, even if they don't know that he knows. And so that's why this whole story of Original Sin is so important regarding Jonathan Hickman's Avengers into Avengers run. Because the other part of this is Thor cannot lift his own hammer. He hasn't regained his worthiness. That, of course, goes into the Jane Foster Thor run from Jason Aaron, a phenomenal run if you've never read it. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. But the other thing that happens is that Thor ends up going on to wield the hammer of an unworthy Thor from an alternate reality. But the last two big takeaways for all of this is that there still has to be a man on the wall, protecting the world from various threats that exist out there. And Bucky Barnes becomes that man. And so in this final moment, what we're told is this: there will always be someone watching, someone who sees all things, all the beauty and horror, all the secrets and sins, someone whose sacred duty it is to record the life of our world, to observe us from afar, to watch but never interfere, to remain forevermore unseen. And he is the unseen, and this is his burden now. This is his curse. So ultimately, Nick Fury was cursed by the Watchers to basically replace the Watcher, to watch everything that unfolds out there, never able to die. And in fact, it stays this way until Reckoning War, which is a phenomenal story. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.